Good evening. One of the highlights of every annual event of the INSS is General David Petraeus. And my pleasure to invite him to the stage to have a conversation. David came to the awareness of the world when he conducted the surge in Iraq and proved that terror can be defeated if you are combine the right methods, military, non-military, and then he was promoted to be the commander of CENTCOM, and in a very unusual way went to Afghanistan to replace General McChrystal, even though it was under the command of CENTCOM. So when he is called to mission, he's going to mission. He was called to the CIA as well. So I feel that we have the most important general and figures that can tell us what's going on in America. Because he was called, he's the only one in this room, I think, that was called to the president-elect to a conversation about being a Secretary of State. And the commander tweeted. He tweeted that it was very interesting conversation. He was very much impressed. So David, let's start our conversation with you sharing with this audience. What do you think after your conversation with the President of the United States since Friday? What will be the deviation from the policies that we saw in the Obama administration in the last 8 years?
Well, thanks. First of all, congratulations to you and to all of your team and to everybody who helps this great institute for another wonderful gathering. As someone said, it's fantastic when there are so many people here that they're in breakout rooms and on the stairs and everything else, and so my congratulations to you on that. And thanks for your kind words. As always, it's always been a privilege to do anything with you, frankly, but particularly to be on stage. We're about to see, I've labeled the new president, the disruptor in chief. And I think that, and I mean that in many respects, in a positive way. He has gotten people's attention. Look, I know we have some European leaders here. I know Malcolm Rifkin and other former leaders from Europe. He and I were at a gathering south of Munich in mid-December. And for the first time, I actually heard European leaders say, we may really have to spend more on defense. This is after Secretary Gates pounded the table at NATO. I was there as a commander at the time. I heard President Obama rail against the inadequate spending, but President Trump, as candidate Trump and then President-elect, got their attention. And so it does actually show where there could be disruptions that could have positive effects. I should also note that when people ask me what was it like having a conversation with him, what was the interaction, what was the process, and so forth, and I have to say that I found him to be very pragmatic. By that, what I mean is that he is understandably someone who won a campaign with what you win. We have some successful political figures here as well. You win a campaign with campaign slogans, which are generally quite big, but generally vague ideas so that you don't antagonize too many people along the way and try to gather as many as you can. And now, and then was in a process of putting policies around these big ideas. And to give you a couple of the examples, we both went in with lists. He had a list of issues that he wanted to hear what I thought about. Candidly, I had a list of issues that I needed to hear his views on to make sure that this would be simpatico and was someone for whom I could serve, frankly, substantively. And so he would say, should we build a wall, General? And I said, President-elect, of course we should build a wall. Where we don't already have a wall, we have about 850 miles of a wall. But in the context of an overall campaign to improve security in our southern border, which is eminently sensible, noting, of course, that the net flow of people between Mexico and the United States in the past, each of the past 3 years has actually been to Mexico, not from Mexico. And of course, what we're really concerned about is the Central American refugees and so forth. So it's really perhaps southern Mexico that should have the wall built. But in any event, this was you could have that kind of conversation. I asked him, I said, President-elect, let me get this straight. You're not anti-trade, you're anti-unfair trade, right? And he said, yeah, I can work with that. So this is the way the conversation went. It does indeed put a premium, I think, on the people who are around him. Some of those we know well. A lot of us know Mike Flynn very, very well from the battlefields in Iraq, Afghanistan, the greater Central Command area. We know Jim Mattis very well. He and I fought together as division commander, who wrote the counterinsurgency field manual together. Hell, we fought the battles of the Potomac together as colonels in the Pentagon. And then, of course, he replaced me at Central Command when I went to Afghanistan and had, I thought, a hearing that showed the breadth of his intellect and the forthright kind of answers that he has long been known for. So again, there are a number of figures that we do know, others we will come to know. I do, though, think that there are going to be significant changes in a number of different areas. And, I was writing down a few of those here before, noting that obviously, again, this is all uncertain, but certainly in foreign affairs, international trade, we have a very different approach to that. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, which the previous administration labored on for 8 years and really before that, is not going to be pursued. There will be, however, undoubtedly, actions pursued with greater vigor in the WTO, I think, against what are legitimately assessed as unfair trade practices. TTIP is probably not going to get much energy. You'll see a refinement, perhaps, of the North American Free Trade Act, which I think would be a good cooperative endeavor between President Peña, President Trump, and Prime Minister Trudeau, and my sense is that there have already been conversations on this. On Syria, I think there could be some kind of deal. First of all, I think you actually see a change in objectives. We're not going to be trying to negotiate the establishment of a democratically elected, multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian government in Damascus, which obviously is just completely unrealistic. And it could be that the additional objective in Syria, of course, in addition to the fight against the Islamic State, to defeat the Islamic State and Fatah al-Sham, the al-Qaeda affiliate, and to accelerate that defeat, the added objective would be to stop the bloodshed. And it would involve some kind of deal, certainly, clearly would involve Russia and so forth.
Can you see a three-state
I was going to
solution?
help an Israeli with technology, which is a little bit, after reviewing startups all
I
afternoon.
think Syria is a wonderful place to test the contradictions and the tensions in the campaign.
Yep.
Even though you are waiting for your expectation from a president to be different from a campaigner, but even if you take his campaign claims, you see that in Syria he is in a problem. Because on one hand, he wants to work with Syria. On the other hand, he sees Iran as a threat. So how he solve this tension and how he will stop the almost genocide that go on in Syria?
Well, again, the objective would be to stop the bloodshed. And I think the way you stop the bloodshed is you actually acknowledge that you're not going to achieve what the diplomats have been trying to negotiate. And instead, you negotiate what is essentially an interim arrangement, and that we should stress that, but it is one in which there is going to be a central government and the rump Syria that is basically defined by the areas that the murderous, indeed, Bashar al-Assad with his Lebanese Hezbollah, Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, and Russian helpers and Shia militia have helped him reestablish. But there are going to be other areas defined by probably some kind of statelets. And again, this is going to be a very tough negotiation, not just with Russia, but obviously Turkey has a huge interest in this. There are issues involving the Syrian Kurds, needless to say, who presumably would have some area under their control, and then there's another Sunni Arab statelet that would probably emanate out of Jordan in some fashion. But again, I think what you do is you're going to get some degree of hardening of the existing lines, and we're going to go after the Islamic State with greater vigor, noting that, to be fair to the previous administration, if you'd asked a year ago, what can we do to accelerate the fight against the Islamic State, there were a lot of actions. In fact, a lot of us, and I recommended some on this stage, relax some of the rules of engagement while making sure that you never create more bad guys than you take off the battlefield by inaction. Push advisors further forward, put in further advisor, accelerate the equipping process, provide some stuff directly to the Kurds. There's a whole bunch of actions, put advisors into northern Syria. To be fair to the previous administration, a lot of this has happened, and even just in recent weeks, they've eased up on some of the restrictions. You know, when you fly B-2 bombers all the way from the United States, now that being the case in Libya, of course, that is a big deal. And we've gone after Fatah al-Sham training camps in northern Syria very recently in ways that would not before. There are still certain actions that can be taken. General Dunford has those ready for now Secretary Mattis to share with the President. So I think that will take place. But again, this is going to involve, I think, a situation that acknowledges that Humpty Dumpty cannot be put together again, at least in the short term. And that is a tough reality. But if you want to stop the bloodshed, and that's your objective, more than trying to create some kind of political solution that is probably unattainable, I think that's how you go.
Have you discussed with him the deal with Iran that he promised to tear up the day he will be the president?
I mean, I can tell you what I said, and that was to let's step back and ask, what do we want with respect to Iran? And I think that there are two objectives. Again, it always helps to have a little bit of strategy involved here. The first is to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. And the second is to reduce the malign activities being pursued by Iran, trying to Lebanonize Iraq, supporting Bashar al-Assad, helping Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, individuals, terrorists in Bahrain, the Eastern Province, et cetera, the missile activities. So again, those activities that are causing so much concern. You know, if you ask a Gulf state leader, and I also just did a trip where we were in UAE with Mohammed bin Zayed for a number of days in Manama for the Manama Dialogue, and then met with the Deputy Crown Prince in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The number one problem that they see is, of course, Iran. It's 6 years ago, when I was the Central Command Commander, it would have been the Palestinian issue. That doesn't make the top 4 or 5 now. It's Iran, it is the Islamic State, it is Yemen, it is Muslim Brotherhood type of political Islam, it's Iraq, it's Syria, and then well down is what used to be their number 1, sometimes number 1, 2, and 3, when Martin and others in here were wrestling with these issues. And you can, I think, and I don't know that you tear up the deal to achieve those objectives. In fact, I think you probably do not.
Let's imagine Prime Minister Netanyahu coming to the Oval Office with the same approach from summer of 2015. I ask you to cancel the deal. This is a bad deal. You promised to cancel it. What will you think will be the president's reaction?
I mean, I would be very cautious. You know, when I was an infantryman, I learned how to go around minefields rather than through them. Having said that, if you actually determine what do we really want relative to Iran, I think what's actually preferable to tearing up a multilateral deal, the sanctions of which will not be reimposed by the other parties to that deal, and could end up isolating us more than it isolates Iran. Perhaps what you want is the president of the Republic, who's a Republican Party candidate, of course, the Congress controlled by Republicans, to have a statement of national purpose that says we will never allow Iran to enrich weapons-grade uranium, and then ostentatiously ensure that the U.S. Central Command maintains the capabilities to make good on that promise. Of course, Iran should not be worried because they have denied having any desire for a nuclear weapon, as is well known. So this would merely be a statement accepting their pledge to the world, but also, again, beefing that up, as I said, with ensuring that Central Command, and I was, of course, the commander when we did, in fact, develop that particular plan, and then figure out how you can, with your ally and your partners in the region, counter the malign activities and ensure that Iran's objective of a Shia crescent that is completely unbroken on the ground, actually, with ground lines of communication from Tehran through Iraq, through Damascus, and then down into southern Lebanon with an Iranian hub right on top of Israel, is never a reality either.
You know, maybe for the Saudis, the Palestinians are number 7. But for us, they are neighbors. They may be number 2 after Iran, and maybe number 1. So some people here think, especially in the right wing, that with the new president, they have a green light, open check to more settlement, to annexation. How can you see the new administration dealing with it?
So now what you're asking me to do is not just walk through a minefield, but to low crawl through it. This is not a topic, actually, that I did discuss with him. And candidly, again, I think caution would be a good approach on this issue. I had very good conversations with a couple of your ministers this morning in Jerusalem, met with our consul general. And it's always good to sit down with those that have lived with this issue, literally lived with it for not just years but decades, and to remember the nuance and the complexity and all the rest of this with an issue such as another one that seems a no-brainer. Why have the Palestinians been allowed to officially, their documents are in their budget document, to officially incentivize, at least in my eyes, acts of violence? And the more violent, the more the incentive, and the longer your jail sentence, the longer, the greater the pay. And yet, and I totally, I find that absolutely reprehensible, and yet there are, slight reasons why you can then understand why government officials in Israel even have not been pounding the table to get that removed, for fear of fragility, for this, for that, for all these others. And again, the complexities of these different issues, I think, I would hope, frankly, that we could sit down and perhaps return to some of the understandings that I think were quite reasonable and rational, which unfortunately went by the by some years back. But when it comes, as an example, to settlements, I mean, I think, again, if we hearken back to the Bush days, that there was a pretty reasonable approach that would have reduced, again, any of these additional, if you will, obstacles in the minds of some folks. Because at the end of the day, I am one who is still persuaded that there is not an alternative to the two-state solution.
Okay, before we leave the stage, when you come next year and you go to the American embassy, will it be in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem?
It's interesting because Martin handed me, as I was actually just a few minutes prior, knowing that I'm coming up on stage, handed me a cell phone in which it said that the White House spokesman has just announced that they are in the, what was it again, the beginning stages of the eventual movement. Now, I don't know how to interpret that. That sounds refreshingly diplomatic coming from the spokesman. There are a lot of finesses here that would actually be a lot more meaningful than what has happened in the past, where you have a pledge during a campaign and then just total loss of recall. and loss of memory on that issue. And again, my hope would be that there could be something along those lines that would also have reassurances about some of the very sensitive sites, not foreclosing the possibilities for a Palestinian capital, et cetera, and that there could be that kind of approach. Here, in one of the questions, which we're not going to get to, it's what do you see as the biggest threat to Israel in the coming year? And I have said it on this stage before. I actually have said, remember we talked about how this is the best of times for Israel, and it's the worst of times. It's the best of times because Israel is on the threshold of being an energy superpower. Beware of the Dutch disease, by the way. It has enormous deterrent effect from the success of Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, Patriot, all these other systems. My hat is off to my former military colleagues from my former military days, and just the amazement at the pace of development of some of these systems as well, noting that they have been a collaborative effort between U.S. and Israel. It is the best of times because the tunnels to Gaza, which I could never persuade President Mubarak to cut, despite actually tens of millions of dollars of funding for programs when I was the Central Command commander, they have actually been cut. The issues in the Sinai are generally being dealt with. The violence inside, if you will, Israel and this side of the security wall have been very, very, very slow. Even the violence in the West Bank has been reduced again because of very impressive intelligence work by my old partners at Mossad and in the IDF and so forth, and terrific work with Shin Bet. The economy, the startups, I reviewed them, as I said today. You should know I'm personally invested in 2 Israeli startups. This is personal for me. And then the firm in which I'm privileged to be a partner, KKR, is invested in others. And we're actively and very aggressively looking at that. What an incredible tribute to what is a tiny country in the world scheme and is producing such a percentage of the world's innovation. Lebanese Hezbollah is otherwise occupied. I actually think, by the way, there's a deterrent effect of what you have done against Hamas with respect to Lebanese Hezbollah, despite the tens of thousands, over 100,000 projectiles pointed this way. And by the way, I think we have to acknowledge a reassessment now, I think, that much more damage was done to Lebanese Hezbollah in 2006 than the original assessments were. And that also has a very big deterrent effect. They do not want more of that. So again, there's an awful lot of real goodness here. But looming out there is, and we saw it sadly in New York just a few weeks ago in the UN. We see it in other places, other capitals in the world. And the international intifada is what I would say is most worrisome as you embark on a year that otherwise should be an extraordinary year for Israel. And that is what concerns me, that is why I think, again, caution, prudence, and so forth, and pragmatism need to come to the fore.
And this is exactly what we will discuss tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. So thank you very much, David.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Like always, a pleasure.